Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode on Sci-Tech Swiss. Today I am delighted to be joined by the wonderful Margarita, who's also a fellow journalist, and also by Peter, who's actually the executive producer of Sci-Tech Swiss, and he's also the founder of Premier Swiss Media. So welcome you guys.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, so I will also introduce one of the most wonderful topics that we will be discussing today about the Olympics that are actually held in Paris. It's always wonderful to discuss about how technology is evolving, especially when it comes to AI. So when it comes to releasing the AI agenda, today we'll be talking about what is the future of artificial intelligence and how is actually used by athletes and also in the sports and in the Olympics so far. So one of the most powerful statements that I will start with is how they have identified over 180 potential use cases for AI across the Olympics movement and how they're using these potential opportunities to maximize the impact and also how AI is being utilized. As we know, is used in safeguarding and protect the athletes from cybersecurity attacks, also analyzing supporting performance, through different tools that they are using, and also when it comes to AI broadcasting tools, and also in talent identification system by coaches. I would like to know how is artificial intelligence evolving today, and what are a couple of thoughts that you guys have?
Well, I think you covered the whole gamut, so to speak, on what AI can be used for. But absolutely excited that the Paris Olympics, not just the opening, showed us how AI is used. For instance, at the very last scene, the sort of electronic horse riding down the Seine, which was absolutely fantastic. But you also raised a couple of very important ones, which has to do with supporting athletes in becoming better sports people, analyzing, for instance, on the track, their running schedules, protecting them from medical problems and what have you. And you also raised an important point, which has to do with security. But Margarita, what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that something that has impressed me so much is how the world changed in less than 3 years, right? Because in the last Olympics that were after the pandemic, the AI was not as half as developed. So that is the first thing, because in these Olympic Games, we can see how AI is being used in absolutely everything. From security, from the health, from the performance. If there is even a chat, which we will be talking after, that helps the athletes to be, in touch all the time, etc. So it's just too many improvements in very short time. And I think this is just, it's a general thing that is happening in the world. AI is impacting absolutely every aspect of our lives.
Yes, overwhelming, isn't it? Karina, what are your thoughts?
Well, definitely I'm impressed by the new use cases that they have, the fact that they have like a chat box, the fact that they're using artificial intelligence. It's been like a buzzword in the past 3 years. I totally agree with Margarita's statement. And I'm always impressed how they're using that, not just in healthcare systems, but even in sports. I think that's really impressive how things are developing so far. But as well, how it's being utilized in broadcasting, for example. I think that it's also important to raise the main concerns that technology can be used for good, and it doesn't always have this kind of negative connotation that it has.
Yeah, no, I'm fully with you. The interest, if we stay a minute with the health side of it, typically, if you recall the last 20, 30 years, if you went to doctors, analog systems were used. If you were to test your heart, if you test your breathing and whatnot, you're on a running mill with all kinds of, tubes stuck to your body, if you will. All that is gone, which is fantastic news for the coaches, because rather than the runners having to run around with those sort of artificial things, they now can do it over a watch, more or less, or one of those bands here. In the car race industry that I know a little bit, we were able mechanically, by putting things in the engine on the brakes, to see if I drove too fast in that curve, if I broke too late and what have you. Nowadays, it's much easier. So I think from a positive aspect, similar to how the Word document, the Word software from Microsoft replaced the pencil, because before that we had to write everything by pencil or by typewriter, if you recall, which is becoming a museum's piece, if you will. It's the same thing here. So as long as we have sort of AI replacing analog things and helping us getting better data, quicker data, the other positive thing I think about AI is in terms of medical predictions, it can help you prevent things much more. On the security side, it's interesting because I don't know if you know that, but France had to pass a law to use AI in securities, because the biggest concern you have with cameras and watching the bad guys is you see people. Your face is on there, right? So in countries like China, that doesn't matter. I know Monaco is very strict on that too, but typically in the Western world, we don't like the fact that Big Brother is sort of watching us, if you will. And France went out of its way to stress that it will be used for security, everything else but the facial recognition and infringement of privacy. So interesting developments.
I feel that one of the things that I find very interesting is that they are using this to predict possible injuries. So AI can, for example, analyze the movements that the athlete is constantly doing and maybe detect some imbalances, or maybe, it's placing the foot in a wrong way and predict some injuries for the knees or for the ankle or things like this. And I think this is pretty interesting because it's, we're even kind of predicting the future in this kind of sense and trying to keep the athletes on track. And obviously, well, that will be reflected on their performance. And yeah, I think it's very interesting, that aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And what I will add here, it's also how important that is for coaches to know exactly what kind of exercises they need to do to keep in track. And as well, also, this helps also in the talent identification, to be able to identify also using data processes.
I would like to add that their AI allows to have real life statistics. So one of the things that is helping journalism right now is that you can watch the competition and in real life know, for example, the speed of the athlete or how high that person jumped. You don't have to wait until afterwards when you get all the results, etc. So that's one interesting feature that we have thanks to AI right now.
Okay, wonderful. So we're all sort of fascinated by AI. I don't really hear any concerns or what we should be thinking about. Well, Margarita is shaking her head, so you start.
Well, I guess I thought we would discuss it mostly towards the end. But yes, definitely there are some concerns because, for example, with the security aspect that you already talked about, one of the main worries is that there is face detection involved, which is not supposed to be happening. And the authorities have said that this is not happening because it's considered illegal in many countries. But, people are always concerned about this kind of stuff and the big brother aspect of it that you mentioned as well. So that is definitely one of the main things. And talking about the data as well, for example, all this data that is being stored by the AI about the athletes, there is also concerns about this. How is this going to be used? Who can have access to it? What happens if there is a breach and they have all this information about the athletes? There is also some concern regarding that.
Is that centrally located, like in a cloud, or can it be protected like a wallet in Bitcoin trade or NFTs?
I guess for this kind of event, like the Olympic Games, they should be definitely blinded by firewall and, all the security that is needed for something like this. And taking into account that they did this law in advance, it would definitely be protected. Yes, but, this is never completely proved, like you can always have a breach. Even if you have the best security, there is always a little gap where the hacker will go in. And so,
well, it sounds like an oxymoron because on one hand, it's crypto, right? Meaning it's covered, it's hidden. But in order to get to crypto, you have to program it. So whenever you start program it, somebody will find out what your program was.
Exactly.
On the other hand, 100 years ago, somebody found the key because that was the only way to get to the vault, right? So it is what it is. But clearly we leave behind in general independent of AI, we do leave behind what's called a footprint, right? Every time we enter Google, every time we order Japanese food or fly to a ticket on any airline, we do leave footprint in a big way, right? Name, date of birth, credit card number, and what have you. So we sort of got used to the fact they're all good guys out there, and that maybe only the big corporations get hacked and not the individuals. But so far, let's toca madera, as they say in French.
They're also working in collaboration with Intel, which is one of the world's greatest leader in terms of technology and innovation. So definitely they are really backed up by, powerful systems. And also the fact that there's a gap in terms of data protection, but also another concern that it's been raised since in the past few months is probably about technology and artificial intelligence being biased. That's something that they're still working on. And this actually, it's all related to the data and also how the systems are being trained. And also basically that refers to all the data that it's being provided. The more information you have and the more accurate the information is, basically.
Yeah.
Also, you will have more accuracy. And also with the misinformation, that's being one of the main concerns. The thing is, I think it's getting even more challenging for other journalists to interpret these videos or these statements that are publicly being made, if they're actually accurate, if they're actually fake news, or if they're being, really genuine.
Okay. When you say bias towards what? Towards the big hand behind it, or what do you mean with bias?
Bias when it comes to, for example, gender-related issues, for example, using ChatGPT or chatbox. If
Right.
you're providing a certain data, but you're not providing a lot of information, like more accuracy, then of course you're not going to get a lot of clarity.
I would like to add to that aspect of the bias that these kind of AI systems are being created in first world countries, in developed countries, right? So there are studies that show that in Latin America or in Africa or countries that have not the same access to these, then when you ask things to AI, they are biased towards the cultural beliefs or the ideology of people who have created the systems, which in the end are from developed countries, right? So they will not be aligned with the thoughts or with the ideology of people from these other countries that I mentioned, like Latin America or Africa. So that is one of the problems with the bias.
You raise an interesting point. Do we know where AI is mostly produced? Is it really the first world countries? It's not Africa. It's not China. It's not.
But it's also the infrastructure, I think.
Exactly. No, yes, I was going to say that it's mainly
and political aspects are also here. Geopolitical aspects that are actually influencing the whole development, because also the way that data protection is being also processed, I think that differs from a country to another country. And what's really interesting about Switzerland, for example, is that all the data stays here. So all the data that it's being processed is actually protected, especially in terms of the healthcare system here.
Yeah, but most of the biggest technology companies are in the US or in the UK, in these kind of countries that obviously have the money to invest in this kind of stuff that obviously developing countries cannot afford to do. So that is definitely the issue.
Well, when I worked on Wall Street, we had in equity trading, you have what's called a home bias, meaning if you're an American trader and you are asked to buy oil stock, you buy Mobil Oil, right? You wouldn't buy British Petroleum. If you trade in London, you're more biased towards British Petroleum. Why? Because you think, well, it's a British company, I understand it better, right? That's sort of an almost harmless approach, right? Because it doesn't really affect the correlation and the outcome if you buy British Petroleum or Mobil Oil, let's say in general. If I put a political spin behind what you just said, it does become, it is something to think about, right? If, let's say, only the Americans with, let's say, a new president is producing something, maybe that is something to be concerned. The same in Europe, right?
And actually, one of the concerns right now, going back to the Olympics, is that this can make worse the gap that it's between developing countries and developed countries for training the athletes, right? Because if a country has a lot of money to invest in this kind of system that will improve the performance of the athletes, and then another country doesn't, then that means there's going to be a gap between the athletes. But this is something that it's being already reviewed by the Olympic Committee. And actually, the president of the Olympic Committee has said that they are working towards making it as fair as possible, so that this will not create, like a big gap or a big difference in performance between different countries or different backgrounds.
It's an interesting point because if you take the example of mobile phones 20 years ago, they exploded in Africa, Latin America, and in the Far East. Why? Because there was no infrastructure and there was no prohibitive legislation. Whereas here in Switzerland or in Europe, we were so overprotected with, emission of antennas and noise. And if you guys think of the Swiss trains where you have cars where you're not even allowed to use the mobile phone, right? That could be a positive thing, Margarita, where maybe because there is no infrastructure, there is nothing, any AI information that you get is an important one to have because you've less resistance by the government. So it could be something positive.
The thing is, all the ideas are flowing around here, so definitely that's a great thing. But another aspect that no one really talk about, or I feel like it's probably less covered, is the fact that this type of technology was tested for the first time in Senegal, which is actually part of the third world countries, right? And another aspect is that they will host the first ever Olympic event in Africa in 2026. So that's just in a couple of years. So just the fact that they're also trying to focus on the third world countries. I think this will be a method how they will bridge this gap.
In some way, it can also make things easier because some of these programs are accessible for everyone. And one of the things that will be positive for example, athletes that live in areas that, they don't have the money maybe to pay for a proper coach or a proper training or professional training, is that these apps will make it easier to have coaching, because there are apps that design specific training programs for them to improve their performance. So this is something that actually could be a good outcome of AI, is that will make it easier to have proper coaching and proper training for people who maybe cannot afford to have a professional coach.
Although when you go to the New York Marathon, it's the people that basically train barefoot in Africa, particularly the Congo and Kenya and Tanzania. They are some of the best runners in the world because they're still wired 10 millions of years in their DNA. So sometimes you wonder if the so and so shoe is really the difference, and AI makes the difference, or if it's still the human element, right? I had to smile a little bit because I was brought up humanistic, whereby intellect, the normal intellect, was considered artificial instinct, right? Because we're the only species in the world that has instincts, but we are constantly overriding with what I would refer to our common intelligence, right? We eat too much, we drink too much, we don't move enough, and what have you. And now, in addition to this already derivative of instinct called intelligence for a couple thousand years, we now put on top of it artificial intelligence. So this is going to be an interesting thought, because at the end of the day, back to the Olympic Games 3,000 years ago, it comes down to the athletes, right? And it's really a mixture of athletes on one hand, where a person pushes himself or herself to the very limit of its physical abilities. But all this doesn't mean anything unless there's another group of people that are enthusiastic about that, right? Because how enthusiastic are we when we watch a football game, somebody jumping over a hoop, running, swimming, doing all kinds of acrobatic things in our minds. So it does need that balance of instinct on one hand, which means excitement, enthusiasm, being fascinated by what we can do. And on the other hand, that human individual, because At the end of the day, those sports people, regardless if they play team sport like football or whatever, they're pretty single. You're very lonesome out there as a high caliber athlete. So it's interesting how AI is combining all that, making sure we receive the best information, the clearest picture, the most exciting creativity on one hand, and then this individual then can grow and prosper and be fertilized even more. So I look at the whole concept as very positive, and I'm glad that I'm as a boomer that I can enjoy all that. Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's optimism that keeps you alive.
In general, it's actually something that it's very practical. For example, there is an app that the athletes are using right now, and it's an AI app where they can ask things. For example, if they want to know where they have to go, if they want to know what are the rules, if they have a doubt, okay, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to go to this place? You know, these kind of things that they should normally have to ask to personnel, etc., to the staff, and then maybe they're not accessible at all times. And now they can just find all this stuff directly in this app used with AI. And that is something that is, makes everyone's life easier.
Yeah, including languages. I mean, my son just came back from Japan, and I said, how was the English of the Japanese? He said, English? Nothing. I just spoke English, and they listened to it on my ChatGPT in Japanese, hoping he didn't use any swear words in the translation, and the other way back. So absolutely, this is all very positive. One aspect where, of course, as long as we speak about supporting and helping and guiding and whatnot and controlling, that's something manageable. ChatGPT, when it comes to creativity, in terms of you give ChatGPT 3 words and it comes up with a Shakespearean solution of your latest love letter, if you will. That's one thing we need to observe how that all pans out, right? That probably has to do a little bit with bias that Karina mentioned. In some regard, on the other hand, because this is where all of a sudden, if you look back to Stan Kubrick's 2010, where the computer is not just sitting there making sure the airplane flies, now all of a sudden, or the shuttle flies, now all of a sudden he takes over. Will takes over the human element. And I think we have not made the transition yet. I think it's the big elephant, the gorilla at the table that nobody wants to touch, but it is something to keep in mind. It will not affect the athletes because physical performance will remain to have to be done physical. We can discuss if there will be robots or AI type of competitions between the analog human and the machine. We had that in chess, for instance, 20 years ago, where the Russian champion in the world champion in chess was losing against the robot at that time because the robot just could store more moves than the human being ever could. In sports, it's a little bit different. And it's also depreciation from our side to be a little bit different if a machine does it or if a human achieves something outstanding. So wonder how that pans out. But this is development that we need to observe, I think. How is the sort of when will takes over the willpower to make her own decisions away from us based on the knowledge, he or she, the algorithm, that's what it is basically. The algorithm is something that was invented 3,000 years ago in the Middle East. And it basically is just taking what it learns and applies it all the time. It is somewhat of a historic system that looks out in the future. Statistically, that's very challenging, as you might know. If you take past performance and reflect it forward, you have to work with what's called probabilities and Monaco analysis. Can be done, but it's not 100% outcome. So this is something that we have to watch out for. The creative part, the self-creative, what I call the auto-creative part of AI, because that will trigger a different scenario.
One thing that I also wanted to add about the sports and the Olympics so far it's also that it's very hard to achieve these kind of perfections, and that's why humanity has created these machines to demonstrate that okay, there's another creative way on how we can achieve success with the help of a machine trained by humans, right? And one example that just came on my mind is actually how one of the most iconic figures in the world of gymnastics, which is actually Nadia Comaneci, she's a Romanian gymnast. She actually was the first one to achieve a perfect 10 as a score at the Montreal Olympics. I mean, at the same time, we have an example that it's possible, even as a human being, to achieve, let's call it perfection or close to perfection. I mean, you can actually achieve a great score, even training humans. But at the same time, what it's really useful this year is probably, how they're using technology to improve their performance, but at the same time also to improve how much energy they're actually, going to spend on doing these kind of exercises. And, it's also related to their performance and also how they're being protected by any kind of suspicious activities by AI powered video surveillance and, to prevent like any kind of crime, cyber crimes, as we discussed before. So definitely, I think that technology can be a great ally, but at the same time, it's still the human brain that it's doing these kind of things.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting that you say perfection, because it is exactly the human vulnerability that attracts us so much. Maybe if Mbappe or whoever scores a goal all the time, because we know when he's on the field, he will score. How boring would that be? When Mbappe came there at the European Championship with his mask because he broke his nose and whatnot, showing this vulnerability, showing the fact that you can fail. Failing is not something negative, right? Failing is okay. It's part of the sports. I think that is the very attraction. If you have ever been in a live event like the Olympics or a football game or anything else, it's exactly showing the imperfection, or what I would call the limits of perfection, that attracts us, right? Because who the hell wants to watch? I mean, nothing against the Romanian Championship that I watched when I was 10 years old in 1967, having a 10, perfect. But this is exciting because it's the exception. If everybody would score a 10, then all of a sudden we'd say, we need to change the scores. We need to choose an 11, just to
improve the algorithm.
Or something like
and actually what I was going to say is that in the end, we can all agree that what is the most exciting about these Olympics is, the Olympics in general, what I mean is, it's the emotional part of it, right? Like most of the greatest athletes that we can remember, it's been those ones that have very touching personal stories. When you go to the Olympics Museum here in Lausanne, what you can see is mostly those stories. It's the human component, as you said, it's the passion into it, because it's not only about the performance or, being perfect in your movements and having the perfect speed and having the perfect score. It's about how much passion you put into it. And I think that's something that AI won't be able to achieve. The passion comes from us, from that imperfection that we're talking about. So I think that it's probably, and thinking about wrapping up our session soon, I think the message in general is that the human component will still be there, even if we are using all these fancy tools or this technology. The human component is the one that is going to make the difference.
Absolutely. I would fully agree. Just now you mentioned Lausanne. Of course, it is the headquarters for the Olympic Committee. This just shows you what a wonderful country we all live here. That we do have that committee here in Switzerland. You mentioned before AI data protection here in Switzerland. We do live and also AI is very progressed here in Switzerland. So we do live in a wonderful country, and Sci-Tech Swiss is right in the core of all this. Great. Karina, I'll thank you very much. This has been very interesting. I really enjoyed the chat, and would also like to officially say goodbye to you, Karina, from your official post as a senior anchor. You have been with us for 13 months, and today is literally your last day of official work before you move on to greener pastures. So wish you all the best, and we certainly stay in touch. And this has been very insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure having you here on my last episode. Will be featured, but let's hope that we will have other interesting stories to tell, especially from great storytellers right here next to me. So definitely I'm excited about the future and excited to see new upcoming episodes on Sci-Tech Swift lifestyle.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.